The Whispers of Old Wars. Commander Zex Korthal stood before the massive viewing screen of the Galactic Coalition's flagship, watching the stars drift by in their eternal dance. 300 years had passed since the galaxy had been cleansed of the human threat, yet something nagged at the back of his reptilian mind. The Vectarian military officer had heard the stories, passed down through generations like ancient folklore, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerated tales meant to frighten young recruits. The stories spoke of a bipedal species from a blue world called Earth, creatures who fought with a ferocity that defied logic and a cunning that had nearly brought the entire galaxy to its knees. They were said to be individually weak, short-lived, and fragile, yet collectively they had been more dangerous than any force the galaxy had ever known. The Great Purge of 2387 had been necessary, the Coalition leaders had declared. Humanity was growing too fast, spreading too far, and asking too many questions about who really controlled the ancient trade routes. But now, as Zex reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the Outer Rim, those old stories seemed less like myths and more like warnings that had been ignored for far too long. Dr. Mira Chenkov brushed the dust from another piece of metallic debris, her 4 arms working methodically as she catalogued each artifact. The Altarian archaeologist had spent the better part of 2 decades studying the remnants of extinct civilizations, but nothing had prepared her for what she had discovered on Kepler 442 bits, a dead world in the outer spiral. The planet showed signs of having been bombarded from orbit, its surface scarred by weapons that could crack continents. But beneath the destruction, in deep underground bunkers that had somehow survived the apocalypse, Mira had found something extraordinary. The bunkers were filled with technology that didn't match any known galactic civilization, and more importantly, they contained data cores that were still partially functional. Working through the night cycles, Mira had managed to access fragments of the data. What she found made her blood run cold. These weren't the remnants of some primitive species that had been wiped out by natural disaster or civil war. These were the remains of a civilization that had been systematically hunted and destroyed by a coalition of alien species, a coalition that included her own people. The data fragments spoke of warnings sent to distant colonies, of evacuation plans, and of something called the Long Sleep Protocol. But most disturbing of all were the final messages, sent just before the planet's destruction. They weren't pleas for help or cries of despair. They were promises. Promises that humanity would remember. Promises that humanity would return. As Mira compiled her findings, her hands trembled slightly. If these records were accurate, then the Great Purge hadn't been the complete victory that history claimed. Somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness between stars, humans might still exist. And if they did, they had been waiting for 3 centuries to settle the score. The signal first appeared on the monitoring stations of Proxima Relay, a small outpost on the edge of Coalition space. The technicians initially dismissed it as background radiation or interference from a nearby pulsar, but the pattern was too regular, too deliberate to be natural. It pulsed in a complex mathematical sequence that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Within hours, similar signals were detected across a dozen different sectors, all originating from the deep void beyond the galactic rim. The signals were old, using transmission protocols that hadn't been seen for centuries, but they were unmistakably artificial. More unsettling still was the fact that they seemed to be directed at specific targets: ancient battle sites, destroyed colonies, worlds that had been significant during the human wars. The Galactic Coalition's High Command convened an emergency session on Vega Prime, the capital world of the Alliance. Representatives from 12 different species gathered in the crystalline chambers of the Grand Assembly, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones as they debated what the signals might mean. Commander Zex presented the military analysis, his scaled features grim as he outlined the possibilities. The transmission patterns match archived human communication protocols, he reported, his voice echoing through the chamber's translation systems. The timing suggests coordination across multiple light years of space. This isn't random. This is organized. The Altarian delegate, Dr. Chenkov's research supervisor, shifted uncomfortably in her biopod. Perhaps it's simply an automated system, a final message from a dead civilization finally reaching us after centuries of travel through space. But even as she spoke the words, none of the assembled leaders believed them. The signals were too precise, too purposeful. They spoke of intelligence that was very much alive and very much aware of what had happened 300 years ago. The debate raged for hours, with some delegates calling for immediate military mobilization, while others urged caution. The crystalline hegemony's representative, a being of living mineral whose thoughts moved at geological speeds, reminded the assembly that rushing to judgment had been humanity's mistake. We cannot repeat the errors of the past. Its voice resonated through the chamber like the ringing of a massive bell. But we also cannot ignore a potential threat. It was then that the signals changed. Instead of the mathematical sequences, they began transmitting something else. Coordinates, locations throughout coalition space, worlds that had participated in the Great Purge, worlds that had fired the killing shots at human colonies, worlds that had celebrated humanity's destruction. The message was clear, even without words. We know who you are. We know what you did. We remember. The panic that followed was swift and absolute. Emergency protocols were activated across the galaxy. Fleet commanders who had been enjoying peacetime assignments suddenly found themselves preparing for a war against an enemy they had believed was extinct. The older officers, those who had actually fought in the human wars, emerged from retirement with haunted looks in their eyes and stories that the younger generation had never fully believed. "They don't fight like us," whispered Admiral Korath, a Vectarian who had commanded a dreadnought during the final siege of Earth. "They don't think like us. They adapt, they improvise, they turn our own weapons against us, and they never, ever give up." But the most unsettling discovery came from the intelligence division. Analysis of the signals revealed something that made even the most hardened military officers pause. The transmissions weren't coming from a single source. They were coming from dozens of different locations, scattered across the void in a pattern that suggested a fleet. A massive fleet that had been hiding in the darkness between galaxies for 3 centuries. The first visual confirmation came from a long-range scout ship on patrol near the Cygnus Drift. The pilot, a young Zephyrian named Talix, had been following a routine course when her sensors detected something impossible. A gravitational anomaly that shouldn't exist, moving through space at a velocity that defied known physics. As Talix watched, the anomaly resolved itself into something that made her cry out in shock. It was a ship, but unlike anything in the current galactic database. It was massive, easily the size of a coalition battlecruiser, but its design was alien to everything she had been trained to recognize. The hull was sleek and predatory, designed for speed and stealth, rather than the massive firepower platforms that dominated modern warfare. But what truly terrified Talix was what she saw painted on the side of the vessel. Symbols that her ship's computer identified as human text, spelling out words in a language that had been declared dead centuries ago. UES Indomitable, her translator system pronounced in its mechanical voice. United Earth Ship Indomitable. The ship didn't respond to her hails. It didn't alter course or acknowledge her presence in any way. It simply continued on its path, moving deeper into coalition space with the patience of a predator that knew its prey was already trapped. Behind it, emerging from the darkness like ghosts made manifest, came others. Dozens of ships, then hundreds, then thousands. A fleet that had been building in secret for 3 centuries, designed and built by a species that had been written off as extinct. Ships that bore names like Retribution, Reckoning, Never Forget, and Humanity's Answer. At the center of the fleet, dwarfing even the largest coalition vessels, was a ship that seemed to bend light around itself. It was elegant and terrible, a monument to 300 years of patient planning and careful preparation. Across its hull, in letters that could be seen from orbit, was painted a single word that sent chills through every intelligence analyst who saw the images. Lazarus. The dead had risen, and they were coming home. The reckoning fleet. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Lazarus, her weathered hands clasped behind her back as she watched the holographic display that showed the positions of coalition fleets throughout the galaxy. At 67 standard years, she was young by the standards of her generation, most of whom had lived through the 3 centuries of exile in the void between galaxies. Genetic engineering and medical advances had extended human lifespans considerably, but more importantly, they had ensured that the memory of what had been done to Earth never. The bridge around her was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. 300 years of constant innovation had produced technology that was both familiar and alien. The displays showed information in ways that human minds could process intuitively, while the underlying systems operated on principles that would have seemed like magic to the coalition species who had once thought themselves superior. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Commander Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different systems. The Altarian Collective is requesting immediate peace negotiations." Sarah allowed herself a thin smile. The fear was spreading faster than their ships could travel. Good. Fear was a weapon that humans had learned to wield with devastating effectiveness during their long exile. "Ignore them," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. "We didn't travel 300 light years to accept surrender before we've even fired a shot. Open a channel to the fleet." The holographic display shifted, showing the faces of hundreds of ship commanders, each one a descendant of the refugees who had escaped Earth's destruction. They were human, but they were also something more. 3 centuries of genetic optimization, cybernetic enhancement, and pure evolutionary pressure had created a species that was faster, stronger, and smarter than their ancestors. They were what humanity had become when pushed to the absolute limit of survival. "Fleet commanders," Sarah began, her voice being transmitted to every ship in the Armada. "Today we begin the final phase of Operation Lazarus. Our ancestors were betrayed, hunted, and nearly destroyed by the species that now tremble at our approach. They thought they had eliminated us. They thought they had won. They were wrong." The faces on the display showed no mercy, no hesitation. These were people who had been raised from birth with a single purpose: to return to the galaxy and reclaim humanity's place among the stars. They had been born in the cold depths of space, raised in hidden shipyards, and trained for a war that had lasted 3 centuries. "Remember," Sarah continued, "we are not here for conquest. We are here for justice. We are here to ensure that what happened to Earth never happens again. We are here to show the galaxy that humanity cannot be destroyed, cannot be forgotten, and will never again be underestimated." The communications officer's voice cut through the moment. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Coalition High Command. They're requesting direct communication with our fleet commander." Sarah nodded. "Put them through." The holographic display shifted again, showing the reptilian features of Commander Zex Korthal. Behind him, she could see the crystalline chambers of the Coalition's Emergency Command Center, filled with the representatives of the species that had destroyed her people's homeworld. "I am Commander Zex Korthal of the Galactic Coalition Defense Force," the alien began, his voice carrying through the translation systems. "To the unknown fleet approaching our space, identify yourselves and state your intentions." Sarah stepped forward, ensuring that her image was clearly visible to the coalition leaders. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Fleet. We are humanity, and we have returned to reclaim what was stolen from us." The silence that followed was deafening. She could see the shock on the faces of the coalition leaders, the disbelief, and then the dawning horror as they realized what they were facing. "Impossible," whispered one of the delegates, a crystalline being whose harmonic voice carried clearly across the channel. "Humanity was destroyed. We witnessed the death of your homeworld." Sarah's expression remained cold. "You witnessed the death of one world. Humanity is more than just a single planet. We are an idea, a spirit, a determination that cannot be killed by orbital bombardment or genocide. For 300 years, we have watched you from the darkness. We have studied you, learned your weaknesses, and prepared for this moment. Ambassador Cree Voss, a veteran diplomat from the Altarian Collective, stepped forward. His multiple arms gestured in the traditional posture of peace negotiation. Admiral Chen, surely we can resolve this situation through dialogue. The actions of the past were driven by fear and misunderstanding. We can build a new future together. Sarah's laugh was without humor. Fear and misunderstanding. You systematically hunted down our colonies. You targeted our civilian populations. You celebrated our destruction. And now you speak of misunderstanding. She gestured, and the display showed images that made the coalition leaders recoil. Pictures of human colonies burning, of refugee ships being hunted through space, of the final bombardment of Earth itself. Images that had been preserved and passed down through generations of survivors. These are not misunderstandings, Sarah continued. These are war crimes, and today they will be answered. The display shifted again, showing the true scope of the human fleet. Thousands of ships, ranging from sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the coalition's arsenal. But more importantly, it showed the technological superiority that 3 centuries of focused development had achieved. We call this the Reckoning Fleet, Sarah explained. Every ship was built with a single purpose: to ensure that humanity's return to the galaxy would be absolute and unquestionable. We have weapons that can destroy entire fleets without firing a shot. We have defenses that can turn your own weapons against you. We have technologies that you cannot understand, let alone counter. General Marcus Webb, Sarah's ground forces commander, stepped into view. His cybernetic enhancements were visible beneath his uniform, marking him as one of the enhanced humans who had been designed specifically for warfare. We also have something you lack, he added. We have 300 years of absolute determination. We have generations of people who have lived for nothing but this moment. We have the patience to wait for the perfect opportunity and the will to see it through to the end. The coalition leaders were silent, processing the implications of what they were seeing. These weren't the same humans they had destroyed centuries ago. These were something new, something harder, something that had been forged in the fires of survival and tempered by generations of planning. What do you want? Commander Korthal finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the human compassion that had somehow survived 3 centuries of exile. We want recognition. We want our place in the galaxy restored. We want guarantees that what happened to Earth will never happen again. And we want the species responsible for our exile to understand that humanity is not to be trifled with. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But mostly, we want to go home. We want to rebuild our worlds, raise our children under real suns, and live in peace. The question is whether you will allow us to do so, or whether you will force us to take what we need. The artificial intelligence known as Oracle, humanity's collective consciousness system, spoke through the communication channels. Its voice was both human and inhuman, the product of centuries of technological evolution. The Galactic Coalition has a choice to make, it said. You can accept humanity's return and work with us to build a better galaxy, or you can resist and face the consequences of your actions. But understand this. We are no longer the species you destroyed. We are something new, something stronger, and something that will not be stopped. The display showed real-time tactical analyses, demonstrating how the human fleet could disable the coalition's defenses without significant casualties. It showed economic projections, proving that cooperation would be more beneficial than conflict. It showed social models that demonstrated how humanity's return could strengthen the galaxy rather than destabilize it. But most importantly, it showed the faces of the humans themselves. Men and women who had been born in the darkness between stars, who had grown up with the knowledge of what had been done to their ancestors, but who still chose to offer peace rather than vengeance. We are not the monsters you made us out to be, Sarah said finally. We are not the threat you convinced yourselves we were. We are simply a species that refuses to be destroyed, refuses to be forgotten, and refuses to accept that might makes right. She gestured to the stars visible through the viewing screens. This galaxy is large enough for all of us. It always has been. The question is whether you have the wisdom to recognize that fact, or whether you will repeat the mistakes of the past. The communication channel closed, leaving the coalition leaders to contemplate their response. Throughout the galaxy, human ships took up positions around key systems, not as conquerors but as guardians. They had returned not to destroy, but to ensure that destruction could never again be visited upon the innocent. The age of humanity's exile was over. The age of humanity's return had begun. And the galaxy would never be the same.